all the judges all set? All right, negative team? All right, let's get started. Peaceful Tomorrows, an organization of more than 200 relatives of victims of the 9/11 attacks, stated in 2011, quote, "As families of those who were murdered on that day, we have waited nearly 10 years to see those who have committed these savage criminal acts to be brought to justice. Military commissions have been embroiled in a series of legal controversies, and we fully expect that this inadequate alternative to our well-tested federal court system will continue to delay our pursuit of justice." End quote. Our premise as the affirmative team is that we agree with the victims of 9/11. Agree with them about this situation that has not changed in the 7 years since this piece of evidence was written. The fact that 5 people who were associated with 9/11 were thrown into the military commission system only for them not to be convicted for over 17 years. We believe that military commissions have failed in every conceivable way, and that despite their original intent to be effective at punishing terrorists, they have failed at their most basic premise. Because federal courts offer compelling advantages and military commissions do not, we urge an affirmative decision. I'd like to first respond to the principle of the negative team, which was that we should keep the option for using military commissions open. Their basic claim is not that military commissions are better than federal courts always, but that there are situations where they should be used. My response to this is they must show an advantage. Negative must show an advantage. This is something my partner clarified in cross-examination. If there ever were to be a situation where we use military commissions, they have to provide examples and provide concrete reasons why military commissions would work and federal courts would not in any given situation. They cannot simply attack federal courts for being not perfect. They have to establish that military commissions would work, and thus far they have not. So responding to their idea of justice, they talked about how effectiveness doesn't necessarily equal justice. And they talked about how the examples in our 1AC don't necessarily apply because we don't know what an effective punishment looks like. My response is an intuitive look at 2 cases. In the 1AC, we brought up an example of 2 different people who were tried under material support for terrorism in each system. The results were completely different. And although it's impossible for us to say what counts as a fair punishment, it relies on the intuition of the people who observe it to see what a due punishment is. And someone who is associated with Osama bin Laden being acquitted of all charges because military commissions were ill-equipped is not acceptable. So we can see how due punishment in due time is a concrete advantage that happens through federal courts. The next point is that they said we must show a concrete harm as the affirmative team. I have 2 responses to this that both illustrate how justice is being harmed. First is lack of closure. Again, the fact that 9/11 co-conspirators have not been convicted for 17 years is blatantly unacceptable. There's a lack of closure not only for the relatives of those victims, but every single person in America who was and is affected by 9/11 to this day. The second reason there's concrete harm is the lack of due punishment. And that lack of due punishment is seen by the fact that because military commissions are so inept at actually reaching convictions, they do so much slower, and also they only have 32 criminal charges at their disposal, which has led to many acquittals in the past. They are inept at achieving that due punishment. And those 2 points together illustrate how justice is harmed in the current system, and our case attempts to, if not will, solve the problem of justice. Their disadvantages they brought up were first that we're removing a valuable option. My response is no advantage to military commissions. No advantage to military commissions. According to David Glazier of the Ohio State Law Journal in 2012, quote, claims that the commissions offer legitimate practical advantages over Article III courts are mistaken. Commission rules for classified evidence, for example, are based on the Classified Information Procedures Act that have been applied by Article III courts in dozens of terrorism cases since 9/11. So the commissions have no legitimate advantage in any of these respects, quote. Now it's possible the negative team could start talking about how the evidence standards are different in each system. However, we can continue discussing the fact that when we have developments such as the 2006 and 2009 reforms mentioned in the 1AC, it has happened to the point where military commissions are now just an objectively worse option than federal courts. Anytime federal courts fail, military commissions would fail just the same. And that shows how there is no advantage to military commissions, and we're not removing a valuable option through passing our plan. Their second disadvantage was that this plan enables or endangers national security. And my response is no impact. No impact. They brought up a couple quotes saying that, well, perhaps when we bring people onto federal soil, there could be some sort of impact and there could be a national security threat. However, they provided no practical examples of how that takes place. We have a couple more responses to that. The second response is that prisons are safe. Human Rights First established on February of 2018 that, quote, federal prisons hold hundreds of individuals convicted of terrorism-related offenses. None have ever escaped. And my third response to that is that there are no attacks in courts either. That same Human Rights First source said that none of the districts that have ever tried terrorism suspects have been attacked in response, and Guantanamo actually hinders counterterrorism efforts, end quote. So what we can see is that they are essentially speculating, the negative team, that there is some sort of national security threat at stake. Now, I can't fault them for that, because the common conception of, and part of the reason that military commissions still exist, is that we're putting terrorists somewhere far away so they can't hurt us. But the negative team has proven none of their points. And in addition, there have been no attacks in prisons or escapes from prisons or attacks in court. So we have no reason to believe that there's a national security threat through passing our plan. And that's why that disadvantage does not stand. The third disadvantage is that federal courts are not perfect. And my response is not our contention. Not our contention. In fact, my partner brought up in her last speech, actually the first affirmative constructive, that we agree that federal courts aren't perfect. But what the negative team has to do is show a situation where federal courts didn't work and then military commissions did work. The problem is federal courts aren't perfect. We completely agree with that. Our burden as the affirmative team is rather to prove that federal courts are objectively better than military commissions. Both systems are capable of failing. And any situation where federal courts have failed, military commissions would have failed just the same, because the standards used in both systems are the same. And so that's why that disadvantage does not stand. So moving on to a couple more advantages, and this is to establish additional reasons that federal courts should be preferred over military commissions. The first is international cooperation. International cooperation. William Finnegan established for the New Yorker in 2017 that, quote, many successful terrorism prosecutions in recent years have followed extraditions or transfers to the United States that would not have occurred if Guantanamo and its military commissions had remained an option. Our counterterrorism partners, including the United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, and the Netherlands, refuse to provide evidence or cooperate with extradition requests unless the suspect is to be tried in a federal court, end quote. Now, it is correct when the negative team noted that federal courts are an option right now. In fact, that proves our advantage. If we were to pass this plan such that federal courts are the only option, international cooperation is guaranteed in every scenario instead of just some scenarios. The third and final advantage is intelligence gathering. Richard B. Zabel stated that, quote, under the federal sentencing laws, courts have meted out harsh sentences to individuals convicted of terrorism-related offenses. The severity of these sentences in some cases also encourage cooperation from terrorist defendants who hope to garner sentencing leniency, end quote. And so because of the harsher and more due punishment in federal courts, there's also plea deal cooperation, leading to more intelligence and greater national security. Additional advantages to using federal courts instead of military commissions. So fundamentally, we have demonstrated that federal courts provide compelling advantages: due punishment in due time, international cooperation, and intelligence gathering. While military commissions is a serious problem involving the intent of the commissions versus the reality of the commissions. The realities show that they have failed, that they offer no legitimate advantages. For this reason, we urge it for